My husband hit me for years and told everyone I was just clumsy, and his whole family believed him because he was their good boy. So I recorded him one night and destroyed his life. I married Noel when I was 26 because he was the first man who remembered my coffee order and held doors open and called my mother ma'am. He was polite in front of people. That's the thing nobody tells you about men like Noel. They are so polite in public that when you try to tell anyone what happens behind closed doors, you sound insane, because the version of him they know would never do that. The first time he hit me was 8 months in. I dropped a bowl while doing dishes and it shattered on the floor, and he came into the room and slapped me across the face and told me to be more careful with things. He paid for a bowl from a set his mother gave us as a wedding gift. He hit me over a bowl. The next morning he drove me to breakfast and pulled my chair out and ordered my food and smiled at the waitress and tipped 80% and held my hand in the parking lot. He never said sorry about the bowl. He just acted normal the next day and expected me to do the same. I did, because when he was good, he was so good that I convinced myself the bad parts were just moments. They were not moments. They were a pattern. Every few weeks, something would set him off. I talked too loud at dinner. I forgot to pick up his dry cleaning. I bought the wrong brand of coffee at the store. The reason was always small. What he did was never small. He knew where to hit, so nothing showed unless I wore the wrong thing. The ribs, upper arms, the back of my head where my hair covered it. He told me once that if I ever told anyone, he'd say I fell, and he'd be believed, because Noel coached youth baseball and shook hands at church and brought homemade cookies to the neighbors at Christmas. Nobody was going to believe his wife over his reputation. His mother, Colleen, adored him. She called him her good boy. She told me at every family dinner how lucky I was, and I'd smile and agree, because what else could I do? His brother Teddy thought Noel was perfect. His coworkers thought Noel was a great guy. Everyone thought Noel was a great guy. I lived inside a version of my marriage nobody else could see, because he made sure the walls were thick and the doors were closed and my voice stayed quiet. He made sure I didn't have close friends. He had a way of frowning when I made plans that meant I'd cancel them by Friday. He made sure I didn't go out without him. If I went to the grocery store, he wanted a receipt and a timestamp. He made sure that when I finally got tired enough of his hand on my arm, there'd be nowhere obvious to go. My own mother, Viola, lived 3 states away, and we used to talk every Sunday, and then we didn't, because Noel would stand in the doorway, tapping his wrist while I was on the phone. He'd bring up the long-distance bill later as a joke that wasn't a joke, so I stopped calling. I stopped because it was easier to be lonely than to deal with what came after the call ended. 3 years in, I started to crack. Not because of the hitting, because of the lying. I was so tired of falling downstairs and walking into doors and being clumsy and tripping over nothing. I was tired of repeating his excuses to people who didn't even ask that hard. My coworker Josie noticed a mark on my wrist once, and I told her I burned it cooking. She believed me, because why wouldn't she? But she looked at me a second too long, and I knew she was filing it away somewhere. He had a way of breathing through his nose when he was about to start. Low and slow, like he was building up to something. I'd hear it from the next room and my whole body would go still. He'd find a reason the carpet had a streak. The vacuum missed. I'd bought the wrong olive oil. The towels were folded wrong. His home, he'd say. Not our home. His. I learned to read his face the way some people read weather. I learned which silences meant nothing and which ones meant something was coming. I learned to walk softly on the carpet because if my heels hit the floor, he'd say I was being dramatic on purpose. I learned to keep the lights low because bright lights gave him headaches. I learned to keep my voice in a register that didn't carry. By the 3rd year, I didn't recognize the way I sounded on a phone call. My voice had gone small the way the rest of me had gone small. There was a night in the 2nd year when I dropped a fork at dinner and I flinched before it even hit the plate. He saw the flinch and he smiled. He didn't do anything that night. The smile was the thing he did. The smile said he didn't have to. There was a morning I came back from the grocery store with the wrong almond milk, and he stood in front of the open fridge and read the label out loud to me twice, asked me what I thought sweetened meant. He held the carton in his hand the whole time. He didn't throw it. He just held it. I learned that holding was sometimes worse than throwing, because holding meant he was choosing, every second, not to. There was a Christmas where his mother gave us a vase. He told me he didn't like where I put it on the mantle. I moved it 3 times that day, and 3 times he said it was wrong. The 4th time he picked it up and set it back exactly where I had placed it the first time and said, "There was that so hard?" That was the kind of game. Move things. Move yourself. Move your voice. Move your face. Move the way you breathed near him. The week before his mother's birthday dinner, he came home late on a Saturday, and I knew before he was through the door. I was at the counter chopping onions for soup, and he came up behind me and put his hand on the back of my neck. Not hard at first. Just enough to remind me he could. He told me the soup smelled cheap. He told me Viola had called the house twice that day and I shouldn't be wasting his time on her. He told me my hair looked tired. He said it like he was doing me a favor by pointing it out. Then he turned me around and grabbed my wrist. He squeezed it the way he squeezed it when he wanted to leave a mark without leaving a story. He held it until my fingers started to tingle, and then he let go and walked into the living room and turned on the game like nothing had happened. I stood at the counter and looked at my wrist. It was already starting to turn red, and I knew by morning it would be a full ring of purple. 4 little fingerprints and a thumb mark the size of his hand, stamped onto me like a receipt. I usually had a long-sleeve shirt set aside for days like this. I had a whole drawer of them. Sleeves for July, sleeves for the pool, sleeves for the times I had to face people. I went into the bedroom and looked at that drawer, and something inside me went very still and very clear. I was not going to wear long sleeves to Colleen's house tomorrow. I was not going to make up a story about a door or a fall or some clumsy thing I did near the dishwasher. I had been carrying his lies in my own mouth for 3 years, and I was done carrying them. I closed the drawer and I went to bed. I lay next to him while he snored, and I thought about the bowl and the wrist and every place on me he knew to hit. I thought about Colleen calling him her good boy at every dinner while I sat across from her with bruises she couldn't see because I was the one keeping them hidden. I was the reason she still loved a man who deserved to lose her. I had been helping him. I had been helping him for 3 years. I lay there until the sky outside the window turned gray, and I made one decision. That decision walked me through the next morning like somebody else was driving. I thought about all the things I had said about myself out loud over the last 3 years to make his story stand up. I had told a doctor I tripped over a rug. I had told a coworker I was clumsy on the stairs. I had told my own mother I was fine. Every one of those sentences was a brick in the wall he had built around me, and I had handed him the bricks. I was not going to hand him another one. The next morning, I put on a short-sleeve dress that had been hanging in my closet for 2 years, untouched. I did my hair the way I used to before I got married. I put on lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror with the bruise on my wrist out in the open, and I didn't try to cover it. I looked like a person again. Noel was in the bathroom. He didn't notice the dress until I was at the counter grabbing my keys. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at my wrist. Then he looked at my face, and I watched him do the calculation behind his eyes, the same calculation he did every time he had to decide which version of himself to use. He smiled the smile he used at restaurants. He said, "Don't forget your cardigan, baby, you're going to be cold." His voice was light, the public voice. He held out the cardigan he had already pulled from the closet and laid over the back of the chair, like he had been planning for this. I took it from him and laid it on the counter and picked up my keys and walked past him to the car. He stood there for a second longer than he should have. Then he came out behind me and got in the driver's seat and didn't say a word the whole drive. Colleen lived 20 minutes away. 20 minutes in the car with Noel breathing slow through his nose. I kept my hands in my lap and watched the road and counted streetlights to keep myself steady. I had ridden in this car with him 1,000 times and had never once asked him to slow down or change the music or take a different route. I just sat there and let him drive me wherever he was driving me. That morning, I sat in the passenger seat and I knew it was the last time I'd ride beside him as somebody who lived in his house. He pulled into her driveway. Teddy's car was already there. So is Andres, my oldest friend, who had known Colleen for years and got invited to her birthdays the way family does. I had called him 2 days before. I told him I might need someone there. I didn't tell him why. He said yes without asking a single question. That was who Andres was. That was who he had always been. I got out of the car, and Noel got out beside me and put his hand on the small of my back the way a husband does when he's guiding his wife up to a porch. I let him, because I needed him to think nothing was different. Colleen opened the door and pulled me into a hug and called me sweetheart and told me I looked beautiful. She didn't see the wrist yet. The hug pressed my arm against her side. She walked us into the dining room where Teddy and his wife and Andres were already at the table. The room smelled like rosemary and onions. There was a candle in the middle of the table and a small stack of wrapped birthday gifts at the head of it. Noel took his seat at Colleen's right hand, the way he always did. The good son. I sat across from him. I put my hands on the table on purpose. I let my wrist sit there in plain sight. Andres saw it before anyone. He didn't react. He just glanced at it, then glanced at me, then went back to talking to Teddy's wife about a movie. He was waiting. He understood. Before anyone said another word, Colleen brought out the roast and set it down on the trivet in the center of the table and reached across to start carving, and her eyes stopped on my arm. She froze with the knife above the meat. She said, "Honey, what happened to you?" Her voice was the voice you use with a child, concerned, not yet alarmed. I felt Noel shift in his chair. I didn't look at him. I looked at Colleen and I said it the way I had practiced in my head all morning. Not angry, not crying, just plain. I said, "Noel grabbed me last night." Colleen's hand with the knife came down slowly to the table. She set the knife on the platter. She said, "What?" I said, "He grabbed my wrist. He squeezed it until it bruised. He has done it before. He has done worse. I have been telling people I was clumsy for 3 years. I am not clumsy. I have never been clumsy." Teddy's wife put her glass down. Teddy looked at Noel. Andres did not move. He didn't need to. Noel laughed a short one, the kind he used to make people think they had misheard. He said, "Mom, she has been having a hard time. She's been emotional. We had a stupid fight last night and she is exaggerating. You know how she gets." His voice was light, public. Noel, the one who held doors open. He reached across the table and put his hand on top of mine. He squeezed not hard enough that anyone watching would see, just hard enough that I would. The exact same pressure he had used on my wrist the night before. I looked at his hand on mine. I did not move my hand. I just lifted my eyes and looked at Colleen and said, "He is doing it right now." Teddy said, "Noel, just the name. Quiet." Like a warning he didn't know he was capable of giving his older brother. Teddy's wife pulled her chair back from the table half an inch. Just half an inch. But it was half an inch away from Noel and toward me, and I felt every centimeter of it. Colleen's face changed. I watched it happen. The mother who had called him her good boy at every dinner for 3 years was looking at her son's hand pressing down on her daughter-in-law's hand. And she was finally seeing it not because of a story I told, but because of what was happening on her own dining table, in her own house, in front of her own birthday roast. Noel realized she was watching. He pulled his hand back too fast, the way you pull back from a stove. And in the pulling back, his face flickered. The mask slipped for 1 second. He was not the good son and the polite husband and the man who tipped 20%. He was the man who breathed slow through his nose before a bad night. His jaw set, his eyes went hard, and then he caught himself and tried to put the smile back. But it was too late. Colleen had seen it. Teddy had seen it. Teddy's wife had seen it. Andres had seen it. The smile he put back on didn't fit anymore. It sat on his face like a sticker that wouldn't lie flat. Colleen stood up from her chair. She walked around the table to my side. She picked up my arm gently and turned my wrist over and looked at the ring of purple I had been hiding from her for 3 years. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, she put my arm back down very softly, the way you set down something that's been broken and you're trying not to break it further. She walked over to where Noel was sitting and stood there. He looked up at her. He started to speak. She held up her hand. She said, "Don't." She said it the way she used to when he was a boy and she had caught him in something. Then she said, "Get up." Noel said, "Mom." She said, "Get up, Noel." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. He stood. Colleen looked at him for a long moment in her own dining room, with her birthday roast going cold on the platter, and she said, "I want you out of my house right now." Noel looked at Teddy. Teddy looked at the floor. Noel looked at Andres. Andres was already standing, just standing, not moving, but ready to. Noel turned back to his mother, and his face did the thing again. The flicker, the drop, the hard-set jaw, and he said, Low and tight, the private voice creeping up into the public room. You are going to take her side over your own son? Colleen said, I am not taking sides. I am seeing what is in front of me. And what is in front of me is a man who hurt my daughter-in-law in his own home and then sat at my table and squeezed her hand to keep her quiet. I raised you better than that. So either I didn't raise you right or I didn't see. Either way, you are leaving this house. Noel's chin trembled the way it always did right before he switched modes. I had seen it 100 times in our living room. I had never seen anyone else see it. It was strange watching a private thing become public, like watching something only meant for one room suddenly exposed to light. He didn't know what to do with his face when 5 people were looking at it. Andres took one step around the table. Just one. Noel saw the step. He looked at me. He said my name. Just my name. The way he used to say it when he wanted me to come back to him after a bad night. Soft. Almost tender. The voice that used to work. I looked at him across his mother's dining room and said nothing, because I had spent 3 years answering that voice with apologies and tea and quiet feet on the carpet, and I had nothing left to give it. Noel walked to the front door. He didn't slam it. He didn't kick anything. He didn't shout or curse. He closed it gently behind him, quietly, the way a polite man would. The way Noel always did when someone was watching. Through the dining room window, I watched him sit in his car for a moment before he started the engine. He didn't look back at the house. He just sat. Then he pulled away. Colleen sat down in his empty chair. She put her hands flat on the table the way she did when something had just broken inside her. She didn't cry. Colleen wasn't a crier. She just sat with her hands on the wood and breathed slowly and looked at the place where her son had been a minute ago. Teddy's wife reached across and put her hand over Colleen's. Teddy was already on his phone, calling the lawyer his wife's sister had used the year before. His voice was low and businesslike. He used the word emergency twice. Andres sat down next to me and didn't say a word. He just sat. He put his hand on the back of my chair without touching me, the way you place a guardrail next to someone you don't want to fall. The roast got cold. Nobody ate. Nobody moved. We stayed at that table together for a long time, the 5 of us, while the truth my body had been carrying for 3 years finally took up its own seat. Eventually, Colleen stood up and wrapped the roast in foil and put it in the refrigerator and said very quietly, I'll heat this up tomorrow like the dinner could still be saved. Like anything could. I went home with Andres that night to the spare room he had always kept made up since I'd known him, the one with the window that looked out at his neighbor's lemon tree. I called Viola from his guest bed. She cried before I even finished the first sentence. She said she had known. She said a mother always knows. She said she should have come for me sooner. I told her she couldn't have known. And she said yes, she could have. She just hadn't wanted to. And that was the truth nobody wanted to sit with. I told her she was here now. That was enough. I slept with the light on. Teddy's lawyer filed the protective order. On Monday morning, Colleen drove me to the courthouse and sat next to me in the waiting room and held my hand the way she used to hold Noel's when he was a kid getting a shot. Teddy met us there and stayed for the whole thing. The order came through on Wednesday. The locks on the house were changed on Thursday. Andres came with me to pack a bag from the bedroom and didn't let me go in alone. Noel called Colleen twice. She didn't pick up. He called Teddy. Teddy didn't pick up. He didn't call me. He couldn't. The order said he couldn't. For the first time in 3 years, there was a piece of paper between his voice and my ear, and it held. It was thin paper, just a few sheets, but it held. A month later, I moved into a small apartment 2 towns over. I painted the bedroom a color I picked myself a soft green Noel would have hated. I put a photo of Viola on the nightstand where I could see it from the bed. I bought sheets that weren't white. I bought a tea kettle with a loud whistle because Noel had hated loud kettles and I wanted my counter to make whatever sound it made. I ate dinner standing up at the counter the first week because I couldn't sit at a table without flinching at the empty chair across from me. The second week, I bought a small 2-seater table, put 1 chair at it, and ate facing the window. The third week, I put a second chair at the table and Andres came over for soup, and we ate together, and I didn't flinch once. I locked the door at night, and I was on the safe side of it. Colleen calls me every Sunday. We don't talk about Noel. We talk about the garden and the news and what she's been reading. She told me once, in a quiet voice over the phone, that she had spent 40 years calling him her good boy, and she was going to spend the rest of her life trying to understand why she had needed him to be one so badly. I told her she didn't owe me an answer to that question. She said she owed it to herself. Teddy and his wife had me over for dinner last weekend, and their kids drew me a picture I keep on my refrigerator. Andres still has the spare room ready in case I ever need it. I have not needed it. Sometimes I still flinch when a man standing behind me in line breathes out slowly through his nose. That probably won't go away, but the bruise on my wrist did. The marriage didn't. He didn't.